How's it going, guys? And welcome back to Game of the Week, the series where I show you the best and worst that DPL Season 10 has to offer. To say that this week was a week of all time would be a bit of an understatement, because we saw some fairly wild things. We saw that Gliscor is capable of reverse sweeping 5 Mons without even running Swords Dance. We saw some innovative new tech, being Custap Berry Endure, but on the turn Custap activates?
Emotional damage!
And we got the utter woke nonsense of, at the time of recording, the week's not even finished, because we had a game get delayed all the way to Wednesday to see, are we about to see one of the first 8-0s in DPL series history. So, it's safe to say this was a bit of a weird week. And our game of the week this week is an interesting example of that. Because sometimes you have to realize the context is better than the actual game itself. And because of storylines, our game of the week this week takes place between Fierce Flamethrower and Agency in the SV tier. This is a game that had a fair bit of hype build up. Both guys were 2-0 going in, and two of them know each other for quite a while. And there's some other elements that make it cool that I'll get into later. Huge shoutouts to Draw vs Money Guy in the same series, which I was actually going to nominate it first, but then people asked me to change my mind, and I'm a man of the people. So I did just that, and it won the poll. So, without further ado, let's get into the weeds of this matchup and see why it got the place that it deserved. The matchup is an interesting one, because it's two teams that had a first pick in SV. So, we see Meowscaradas on both sides, but taken in pretty different directions. Fierce's team consists of Meowscarada, Lando I, Corviknight, Terra Hydrapple, Toxapex, Ogerpon Hearthflame, a Terra Mismagius, and a Terra Duraludon. Whereas Agencies is a bit more of the bread and butter boring stuff that I've gone over a million times on this channel. As we see Meowscarada, Terra Keldeo, Lando I, Tinkaton, Mandibuzz, Terra Necrozma, which is pretty cool, Dragalge, and Lantern. I actually faced this team last week, but the less said about that game, the better. So, we look at this matchup here, and I feel like Fierce does kind of have the edge. Fierce's Lando I looks a lot better than Agency's Lando I, because the issue is Lando I just doesn't really do a ton against Corviknight and a good Terra on an Assault Vest Hydrapple. Hydrapple plus Toxapex is a bitch for Agency to break here, because he can't even really rely on Calm Mind turns and getting it right with Keldeo, because he could get Dragon-tailed or he can get hazed by like Spadef Pex. So it makes it quite difficult for Agency to force progress. Maybe there's a Calm Mind Necrozma set that can just click buttons, but even then you still have the Meowscarada in the back that could make it rather annoying, as well as Ogerpon Hearthflame to just click the Ivy Cudgel button. Speaking of the Ivy Cudgel button, he definitely has to bring the Dragalge here to be able to deal with the Ogerpon Hearthflame. Because if he doesn't, that thing just clicks Cudgel the entire time, and while yes, Mandibuzz can take it, it doesn't want to take it long term, and I think having that thing be Fizdef means that Lando becomes that little bit scarier, which is a problem. Especially if the Lando does decide to go Nasty Plot, which is somewhat plausible here. In terms of how Agency forces progress, I think Meowscarada is a big one in getting plays right, because Dual Stab and Thunder Punch are quite good across the board. You also have Triple Axle. But the issue is your knockoff might have to be foul play because of the threat of SD Ogre. Fierce, definitely preferred here, but I feel like Agency might have some creative outs, and it'll be interesting to see how he approaches that. So without further ado, let's get into the game. Getting into the game here, we do see some interesting dynamics, as we actually see the Ogerpon is benched by Fierce, which is an interesting decision and probably affects a lot of Agency's prep. We see the Duraludon instead. And on Agency's side, nothing too surprising. We do see his Lando I bench, which makes sense because it wasn't really going to force progress. A big thing here that we need to discuss at Team Preview is that there was some controversy with this, as there was a mock leaked to Agency through a voice call, which this isn't the first rodeo. Leaks happen a few times in DPL. It's definitely happened a few times where sets have been known ahead of time. And these things happen because people leave mocks public or do it in voice calls and things like that. So Agency went into this game knowing this 6 and knowing the Toxapex set. So that kind of flips the dynamic a little bit, and I'd say it's incredibly infuriating for Fierce. Especially since this is a game that Fierce definitely wants to win, as he's had close ties to Agency for a while, and this is the type of game where he can prove himself as, I'm my own person and I deserve to be here on my own, rather than, I'm just Agency's goon or whatever, which I think is something that has come up in the past. So that introduces a whole new level of complications, which is an interesting addition to this game. In terms of Terra Captains, we see Terra Ghost on the Keldeo, which likely implies Specs because Terra Ghost Terra Blast looks like a good click into the fat stuff, and we see Terra Fairy on the Necrozma, which could be nice for the Hydrapple later if it's set up, because it means it can't get Dragon Tailed. So we'll see which one happens. I'd say it will be Ghost on the Keldeo then. As for Fierce, we see Terra Dragon on the Hydrapple, which is a bit of a surprise. You would have thought something like Fairy maybe, or just something to help with general Keldeo hits. But I guess Dragon's just a good mid-ground. And then we also see Terra Dragon on the Duraludon, but you'd think it's relatively unlikely that gets clicked. So, without further ado, I've done enough of a ramble at the start of this. Let's hop into the game. So Agency leaves with Meowscarada, Fierce leaves with Meowscarada, and nobody's going to risk the speed tie here. But Fierce makes a good play getting into Landers, because it covered the U-turn, as well as it covers the double into Tinkaton, which is a fairly obvious double for Agency to make if he doesn't want to risk the Scarf dynamics. We can also take no information from the fact that Agency's Meow switched out first, because this could well be a speed tie. So I do wonder, Fierce probably has more intel than Agency based on that situation, so we shall see. This, however, is free rocks for the Lando as Keldeo comes in to click buttons. And it does Terra immediately, clicking Terra Ghost Terra Blast, and a crit does 73, which does likely imply this is Specs and a Spadef Toxapex. Crit definitely sucks, but I'm sure this Pex can regen back off later in the game. As we see the Hydrapple come in to take the next one, and this reveals to be extremely Assault Vested. Necrozma comes in hard on the Hydrapple, taking an Earth Power as Fierce tries to catch the Tinkaton. This crit Spadef drop definitely sucks, because it probably means that the value of this Necrozma is lost a little bit, because it can't take hits as well, but you'll kind of see over the next couple turns. See the knockoff getting rid of the Assault Vest, meaning Keldeo is far scarier, and Fickle Beam does not go all out and gets the kill. Heatwave Miss also sucks, because this is another 25% that he could have potentially gotten, but it's interesting, seeing as this was not the rocker, as he was just trying to get chip, and Fickle Beam is able to pick this off. Not 100% sure what the Necrozma set was here, and what its purpose was. It looked like it was just to click buttons, but there possibly could have been scarier Necrozmas in that situation. But knockoff does make Keldeo quite scary. We see the Dragalge come in here to revenge the Hydrapple, as we see hard Corviknight, as we actually see the Substitute whipped out by Agency. Good prep, as we see the Black Sludge. Brave Bird is able to break the sub, showing that Fierce does have a way of doing it, as T-Bolt does 56, which is really good chip. So the Corviknight is going to click Roost here, obviously, as this next T-Bolt is not going to do as much, because obviously no longer a flying type. But the power would have been quite nice on Agency's end. We see a Meowscarada pivot, as Agency goes into Tinkaton, wresting back a little bit of control. But Fierce reveals to be Choice Banded, taking the Rocky Helmet, and Stealth Rock go up. Honestly, really good turn for Fierce, and Banded looks very scary later in the game, especially a click like Triple Axle, because while yes, you would take Rocky Helmet chip from this thing later on, everything dies to it, so that is something to keep in mind for later. Really aggressive click from Fierce, but one that worked out because Agency does badly need rocks at this point. Hydrapple comes in, as the Keldeo comes in, another great play from Fierce. I wonder, was this to try to catch the T-Wave, because taking a play rough might have sucked on this thing, because it puts you in a bit of a worse position, but at the same time, this Hydrapple is not as important as it was, because, it no longer has the Assault Vest. So good play on Fierce's end. We do see the Terra Blast get clicked by Agency, doing 52, as Fickle Beam, he's just going to take his 40% chip and sack the Hydrapple. Makes sense, since the Assault Vest is gone. Meowscarada comes back in and gets to click the knockoff button, as Mandibuzz is the switch in of choice rather than sacking the Tinkaton, getting rid of the heavy duty boots. So you would think that, so the Duraludon comes in here, probably predicting something like a defog, maybe a U-turn out, as we do see the U-turn from the Mandibuzz do a grand total of 8. He gets in his Meowscarada here, which is interesting, because it means he is just trying to click the knockoff button, because this thing is the main mon that is left to be able to take a hit from Keldeo, because Terrago's Terra Blast looks great, and if it gets to a certain point later in the game, Vacuum Wave looks like it could be ridiculous. So he probably wants this Eviolite gone. However, it's not Eviolite. Fierce reveals to be Choice Scarfed, and Terra Dragoning with Draco Meteor clean knocking at the Meowscarada. And from a game that looked like it was fairly neutral, both sides making good plays, Fierce is now in complete and utter control, because he's now lost the one mon that could force the progress that Keldeo needed to do work later. And this very much puts Agency in the back. Tinkaton comes in, obviously, because this is Choice Scarfed into a Dragon move, and the Lando comes in. As we see the double into Keldeo, good play, he has to make it, because he has to try to force progress. As we see the Toxapex come in here, as it is going to get two-shot by Surf because of the crit earlier, which sucks, and Toxapex goes down, and now it is a case of Vacuum Wave looks like it's going to be phenomenal later in the game. If he can just get a bit more chip on the Lando, or if he can just get in, because he has 3 switch-ins left. So he probably needs one more time to, sorry, he has 2 more switch-ins left, let me correct myself. He probably needs one time to be able to click Terra Blast Ghost and get a kill, and the last one needs to just be clicking Vacuum Wave to force progress. Duraludon comes in here, the Dragald sack is going to be the choice on Agency's end to Draco try to get Tinkaton back in, but Fierce decides to click Flash Cannon instead, which makes sense, picking up the 2-shot. Mandibuzz comes in here, and Duraludon is not going to risk this knockoff, as we see the Roost come out from the Mandibuzz, which makes sense. We see Taunt from the Lando, revealing once again to be defensive. His foul play does 27 and takes Rocky Helmet. We see the U-turn out into Corviknight. Are we going to see the U-turn from the Mandibuzz? We are not, his foul play does 23. We see a Roost from the Corv, as we see the foul play for the Mandibuzz, as this Mandibuzz is probably just going to want to look to defog. But the Corv Roosts again, maybe this thing doesn't have Taunt, and we see the Roost from the Mandibuzz. As we see the Taunt on this turn on the foul play. So we're just going to sit here with these 2 birds for a little bit, as Brave Bird does 22, which is not a lot, and foul play does also 22. So I hope you're all having a great day as we sit through this Brave Bird foul play fest, because realistically they're both just going to click Roost on this turn. Maybe Fierce gets aggressive and taunts, as he does, because he can. As we see the U-turn this time from Agency, great play, as the Keldeo comes in and is just going to claim its Terra Blast Ghost kill, which is going to be on the Corviknight. So, just as a quick range check here, we now have 2 mons that are very much in Vacuum Wave range, and a Lando that he just needs the tiniest bit of chip on. Like, if he can get a foul play off on that Lando one last time, then Choice Spec's Vacuum Wave does clean up this game. So Agency's managed to pull this back despite the Scarf Duraludon, which is pretty impressive. We see the Duraludon come in once again, as we see the Tinkaton be the sack of choice, which makes sense. And we are going to see the Keldeo come in now, which I guess makes sense. Mandibuzz isn't healthy enough to be able to take the hit, so this is something that had to be done. So he's going to go for Vacuum Wave, which does clean pick up the Duraludon. And Landorus, he's going to be able to live this 16. He needed the crit there. I don't even think the crit killed, as EQ is going to pick up that kill. And Mandibuzz comes in here. It's going to get taunted, but foul play is going to pick up the kill. And after this Rocky Helmet damage, it's a pretty easy cleanup for Choice Bandit Meowscarada, as we see the low kick and picks up the kill. And that is a really good win for Fierce, starting season 3-0 in his first DPL, which is incredibly impressive. Well, it's an interesting game, and I think it is one that Agency managed to pull back well. I do think there's maybe one misplay he made, excluding the whole, oh, you didn't scarf for Scarf Duraludon, because who scouts for Scarf Duraludon in that instance? Because you look really stupid if it is just an Eviolite one at that stage in the game. So, like, that looks really dumb if you're scouting for Scarf. But I think the one misplay he made is I think he could have potentially sacked the Tinkaton earlier to be able to keep the boots on his Mandibuzz. Because I think if he kept the boots on his Mandibuzz, what would have happened is that he could get Mandibuzz in a little bit more and use it as an enabler, because you're also not taking Rock's chip. And it also meant that you could aggressively U-turn more often, because it does mean that, you know, I think there was times in this game where he did just click foul play, because he didn't want to U-turn out, because he didn't want to take the Rock's chip. Fierce's prep was pretty solid here, as he tried to avoid the defog as much as possible with the double taunt. Scarf Duraludon was really nice, because Dragon Move was just super free, and Banded Meowscarada, and the timing that it revealed Banded Meowscarada was absolutely perfect, as he got the key chip on the Tinkaton that he needed. I do think that this was a very well played game on both ends, and Fierce did deserve to come out on top. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this game of the week. And you're probably also wondering why this is coming out at a different time than usual. Obviously I was late with week 2, but I'm actually early with week 3. And there's a particularly good reason for that, which I'll get into another time. Let's just say there's another video coming tomorrow. And that Game of the Week will continue to be released on Saturdays. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in 2 weeks, because I won't do any mid-season content, because mid-season is fucking boring at the best of times. So, I'll see you in 2 weeks, and see what comes up during week 4. Peace!